Once you've identified costs that are variable or fixed, we also need to understand some economic phenomena that, once again, the accounting department normally does not take into account. Let's say you're Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Automobile Company. It's 1910, I think, or 1915. Prior to that, all automobiles were made one at a time, and I'm exaggerating here, but a dump truck would dump a whole pile of parts on the floor of the garage, and one guy with a lot of tools would start building the car. Henry Ford said maybe there's a better way. Instead of having one worker, and I made up these numbers, one worker producing one car in a day to give us output per worker of 1, why don't we have 2 workers? One does sort of the undercarriage, the engine, the frame, and the other does the body, the hood, all the other things that go on top of the frame. Well, he finds that 2 people, by the end of the day, get 2 1/4 cars done, which is output of 1.125 per worker. Not only is output going up as you'd expect, but efficiency is going up as well. That's the real good thing here. We're getting more output per worker. So Henry Ford said, let's do the same thing. Let's add a 3rd person. Output goes up. Let's add a 4th person. Output goes up some more. Meanwhile, what's happening to output per worker? Goes up from 1.1 to 1.3, 1.3 to 1.5. This is all great news for Henry Ford. This is the concept of the assembly line. Not only are you getting more output, but your output per worker is getting better. Your efficiency is getting better as you're increasing output. However, there's a law in economics called the law of diminishing returns, which says that if you keep adding more and more of an input variable, let's say fertilizer to your lawn, water to your new lawn, as you begin increasing the fertilizer and the water, your grass grows better and better. But what happens when you add too much? Your grass starts dying. You can get to the point of diminishing returns where you're adding too much of an input. Fertilizer, seed, water. And this concept is referred to as the law of diminishing returns. Now let's take that back to the assembly line. We left our story off when we had added a 4th worker. Output had gone up steadily. That's good news. Output per worker had gone up steadily. That's good news. As output per worker goes up, our cost goes down. Cost per unit goes down. That's all good news. Henry Ford says they had a 5th guy to the assembly line. Output goes up some more, but look what happens to output per worker. It starts going down. Add a 6th guy, output goes up. Output per worker starts going down some more. Beyond 4 workers, we've reached the point or the law of diminishing returns. Adding more workers, while it increases volume, that's good, it's making us less and less efficient. Now think of your own place of work, perhaps toward the end of the month. Maybe there's a lot of orders to do, or if you work in an office environment, maybe there's a lot of forms or paperwork to process. So the boss says, let's hire some temps to help out at the end of the month. You add the temps. On the surface, you'd get more work. Let's forget about the fact that you have to train them. Let's forget that. Where are they going to sit? Do they each have their own computer? Do they have their own telephone? If it's an assembly line, they might be getting so crowded they can't work safely. They'll have to borrow tools from each other. Let's say instead of adding temps, your boss says, let's work overtime. Let's work a lot of overtime because we have a lot of orders. What happens to your efficiency when you're working 45, 50, 55 hours a week? All of these are phenomena that demonstrate the law of diminishing returns. You're getting less and less output even though you're adding, in these cases, more and more labor. So if we look at efficiency, up until I think 4 or 5 workers, we were getting more efficient, then we get less efficient. If that's what's happening to efficiency, what's happening to cost? Our cost is going down, down, down as we add more people to the assembly line initially, but then just the opposite occurs. And our costs are going up. Another economic phenomena that probably accountants do understand is what's referred to as economy of scale. While the law of diminishing returns has to do with variable costs, economy of scale has to do with fixed costs. All these numbers, of course, are made up. Let's say your fixed costs per month are $100,000. Your output is 100 widgets, 100 students at CSU, 100 haircuts, doesn't matter what it is. So your fixed cost per unit is $1,000. If the marketing and sales department can increase output or students registering to 500, fixed cost per unit drops to 200. If it increase output to 1,000, fixed cost per unit drops to 100. Is this a good or a bad phenomena? This is a dynamite phenomena. This is great for any business manager. Let's pretend it's, well, first here I just graphed those numbers. As volume increased, fixed cost per unit went down further and further. Let's pretend this is Colorado State. And to make the math easy, nobody get mad at me, let's say tuition is $1,000. Let's also assume there's very, very few variable costs. So here's our total cost per unit. Here's our revenue per unit. What do we call this area in between revenue per unit and cost per unit? Begins with a P, profit. So business owners generally love, business managers love the phenomenon of economy of scale. Has to do with fixed costs.